Welcome, everybody. Good to be here with you today in order to reflect and analyze about blockchain and GDPR. I'm Delphine Girard, has been working on data privacy for many years now and being data protection officer in many companies and currently in charge of GDPR compliance implementation within the group. So the idea today is to share with you my thoughts about blockchain regarding my expertise of the GDPR. So to begin with, I'll propose you to, in a few words, summarize the GDPR notions and the blockchain from my perspective. As you might know, GDPR, in a few words, is about 4 years of negotiations and really the idea of creating a standard of data protection within the EU and also for EU residents or citizens within the world. The regulation has been adopted in 2016 and came into force directly applicable within all the member states of the EU in May 2018. In France, it has been adapted into French law, even if not strictly necessary, as we had a strong tradition in data protection and already an important law into force from 1978. It's really important at this stage to make a difference between confidential data and personal data. Confidential data will be the one for a given organization, for example, who will be financial data without before their validation or publication or any statistics data. They'll be confidential. But on the other hand, personal data are the ones that are related to an individual, identified or identifiable, but they are not necessarily sensitive from one hand or confidential from the other end. Why this is important to make this difference at the very beginning of our time together? It's because GDPR only applies to personal data. In the blockchain, you can have confidential data and personal data, but I'll focus my thoughts and my sharings today on personal data only. Blockchain, from my perspective, a few words I would like to share with you. First, this is, as you know, a technology with a very strong development potential. This is a technology, according to the experts, in which can be built a processing of personal data, but that won't be a processing of personal data in itself. So we need to see the blockchain as a mean and not a purpose in itself. Blockchain then can imply, of course, processing of personal data and also other type of data. And we need to remember that any transaction in the blockchain involves a request for validation of the transaction and then a new block added in the blockchain from all participants. So once we have this first introduction aspects, then let's share a few thoughts about blockchain and accountability. GDPR has been designed in the world where the data management is really centralized and really linked to a legal entity. So one legal entity is one role equivalent, a data controller role, a data processor one, a third party, and so on and so on. But blockchain is by definition based on a decentralized model of data governance, with a multiplicity of actors, which complicates a lot the definition of the rule. Then we can consider participants when they write on a blockchain and decide to submit a data for validation that they can be considered as data controllers. Participants in a blockchain indeed are considered as the one who determine the purposes and the means implemented. Then they will be, in most cases, considered as data controller regarding the GDPR definition. Well, always accountable? Not exactly, because the CNIL, which is the French regulator, considers that participant is data controller when he is a natural person in the context of a professional or commercial activity, and when it's a legal person or a legal entity and register personal data in the blockchain. This excludes natural person, individuals who can put data on the blockchain just for personal matters without any professional or commercial activity. they won't be considered in such a case as data controller. All accountable, not really, because miners that are in charge of validating the blockchain won't be considered as data controller, and neither individuals, as mentioned earlier, in their personal and private activity. Why? Because they do not determine purposes and means of the processing, then they won't be considered as data controller. When a group of participants decide to implement a processing with a common purpose, we need to identify who is the data controller, and it's a bit more complicated than the example seen before. There are many participants and a single processing activities. We have a few solutions. First, creating a legal entity under the form of an association of a GEE, but it's a bit legally complicated and administratively important and hard work to create such an entity. Or all the participants can identify one of them who will take the decision on behalf of the others. It will be designed as as the data controller. Otherwise, all participants can be considered as data controller through a joint responsibility. According to me, this is not a good idea because usually joint responsibility are always working well when there is no problem, when everyone's agree. Once you are facing any problems, any data breach, most of the time, no one is responsible of nothing. So my advice would be, if you decide to put it under the regime of a joint responsibility, be really careful on determining and precising really deeply the role and responsibility of each one. The problem is that it is necessary that the data subject know which entity he needs to turn to for an effective exercise of his rights and protection of authorities. So we definitely need to identify a legal entity, either one acting for the others or a group as an association or a joint responsibility. And in some cases, as we know, blockchains can be anonymous and then we don't know, we have no idea of which legal entity is handling them. But there are also other roles, of course, than the data controller. And there is the first one, main important, just straight after, is the data processor one, so kind of subcontractor in the blockchain. An actor who is considered as data processor is the one acting only on behalf of data controller. In the context of a blockchain, we would consider miners as being data processor. The CNIL and other regulators in Europe advise to have a contract specifying the obligation of each party between the data controller and the data processor. But according to me, it seems a bit complicated to deploy and to formalize namely such a contract in all cases. So I would hope there is such a process and mechanism easily to put in place, but I'm not really convinced of that. Then we can ask the question, would smart contract be a solution? It can, but maybe smart contracts are today more efficient in domain where there is real damages and real responsibilities research. Today, the GDPR appendix that are asked are really more to determine role and responsibilities and to guarantee GDPR compliance. In fact, the challenge now is really minimizing risk for individuals. According to me, these are kind of some GDPR golden rules. The first one is minimization. You collect only personal data that are strictly necessary to the realization and to following your purpose. Then the finality principle, you only use personal data for the objective they've been collected. The transfer is also really important. You do not transfer personal data to a person which is not an authorized third party. And then the retention, you respect some retention period and only keep the data for the duration that has been agreed with the parties. And then you anonymize data consequently. So seeing these four main notions, you can easily imagine what are the ones that will be a bit complicated to apply in some blockchain initiatives. First of all, the privacy by design principle is facing the GDPR because we need, as a data at the data controller before choosing blockchain technology to deeply analyze the coherence of such a choice. And then, if not strictly necessary, the regulator would advise to choose another technology than blockchain. So this is more like a discipline, thinking on privacy by design method to begin with some data processing, personal data processing within the blockchain technology. Then minimization and finality implies a deep analysis of what is my purpose and what are the data strictly necessary for this purpose. Usually this is quite feasible in a blockchain context, because when we decided to use a blockchain technology, it's for a determined purposes, for some determined purposes, sorry, and for clear vision on the data that will be used and what for. And then the transfer. The transfer is very challenging because in a public blockchain, the obligation of not transferring personal data to a non-authorized third party doesn't seem to be really easily applicable. Dealing with the rights of the person, there are some rights that appear compatible with blockchain and others that are definitely not. First, the right to information. There is no problem using a blockchain technology to provide the data subject a clear and accessible information on how the data will be collected and what for. Indeed, this needs to be provided before submitting data to the miner's validation. Then the right to access. Without deletion, I can imagine that I can provide access to the person saying, please see the data we have on this blockchain concerning yourself. And then the right to portability, which is a question we can imagine, and I know there are some tools provided for that, a portability right from a blockchain to another. So this right seems easily compatible with blockchain, but some other are a bit more complicated to implement, such as the right to erasure, the right of modification, and the right of opposition. In fact, as we all know, one of the characteristics of the blockchain is on the fact that the data contained cannot be technically modified or deleted. Then it's quite impossible to answer properly to a request of data erasure, for example. But fortunately, we have some solutions dealing with these problems. First is about encryption. So encryption is by design one of the main technical aspects of a blockchain technology, and it's really reassuring the regulator on that point. And one solution is also that the data in clear is stored somewhere else of the blockchain, and for example, in a personal data center, for example, and the information proving the existence of such data will be stored in the blockchain. It allows us, in case of needing to modify or delete some data, to have some more flexibility. For the right to erasure, it appears technically impossible to really grant an erasure request of the data subject. But some technical matters, as defined here, are allowing to make the data almost inaccessible. And according to the CNIL, this is not a proper erasure, but this is close to the objective of compliance with the GDPR. Then, regarding the right of modification, in fact, there is a lack of possibility of data modification already entered in a block. But we can imagine a subsequent transaction which can cancel the first transaction and then update the data. The same solutions as in the event of a request for deletion of personal data could be applied to an erroneous data if it needs to be deleted. So the idea is really updating a new block in order to update the data and then modify it to answer properly to the right of modification request received. Finally, is GDPR applicable to the blockchain technology? It is quite a complicated question. Why? Because participants, whether minors or not, may be located all over the world. And there are two criteria in the GDPR to be territorially applicable, which is the data controller or the data processor is processing data from the EU. And the other criteria will be that the company, even outside the EU, is offering goods or services to data subject in the Union, EU residents or EU citizens, depending on the interpretation. So GDPR is applicable within the EU, but also to EU residents or citizens wherever they are located. The thing that is, either we consider that we will treat in the blockchain differently data from EU citizens and residents to others, or we all guarantee kind of a standard which is more or less compliance with GDPR, but on the same time also offering such a level of compliance to non-EU citizens and non-EU blockchain. And by definition, we don't know really where is the blockchain actors located. So I do consider that as Facebook or any other GAFA, the idea will be to consider, okay, GDPR need to apply to every actors of this blockchain, as we cannot make a difference and we cannot clearly identify who it's supposed to be applicable to and who is not in the scope. There are solutions, according to the regulator, in private blockchain to kind of regulate the data transfer outside EU, such as standard control clause, like the famous model clause of the EU, binding corporate rules, code of conduct, or certification mechanism. But they will be really difficult to implement in a public blockchain. According to me, even in a private blockchain, these documents are not really easy to implement and will not be the solution retained, according to me, by most of the actors. Well, to finalize, there is some security measures recommended. So in the case of a private blockchain, the CNIL recommends to ensure the absence of a coalition in the control. This is really important to guarantee the balance of such a blockchain and to guarantee that the main essence of such a system is guaranteed and being independent. And then guarantee that technical procedures and organizational measures allow the impact on transaction security of any failure of an algorithm to be lowered down, like kind of guaranteed minimum impact of a transaction of any failure, because we can have technical solution that will be help on that perspective and allowing the blockchain to function properly. In addition, the governance of the changes of the software, for example, need to be documented, and really creating transaction and all this need to be really deeply followed. I'm asking a question today, is it really applicable in practice? So I wanted to thank you for attention, and I'm ready now for any question and answer for the Q&A time.